This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
Well, hey everybody, welcome. It's another Confessions podcast. Hey Bobby.
Hello.
No, a bit quicker. Hey Bobby.
I was just reading over my notes. I
Hey, Matt.
apologise.
Yes, here I am.
This week's collection of shameful stories include A's confession. It's just capital A, that's how he or she wanted to be known. The wind beneath my wings. Barry's tale, you're so far away from me. The confession entitled Cluck, Cluck, Clucking on Heaven's Door from Ken. And we've unearthed another classic confession from the crypt, a tale from years gone by, especially requested by you. But we're going to start this week's podcast with a confession that made everybody head out to buy donuts. It's Simon the Pie Man's Donut Bush City Limit.
Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast. Please be seated.
Father Simon and the All-Forgiving Collective. So yesterday's was committed on December the 17th last year. This confession goes back to 1970, so another one from the archives here, although it's fresh for us. I was 15, says Simon the Pie Man, home for the summer holidays and reluctantly working in my dad's bakery. Having concluded the chances of extracting pocket money from my old man without some graft from me being virtually non-existent, I'd agreed to do 2 weeks' work. It was a very well-known and established bakery with a shop and tea rooms below. The bakery churned out a huge variety of goods. Many of these products were a pain to work on and were subject to a high degree of quality control, aka my old man. I lost count of the number of times I had my eclairs rejected. Too short, too long, not enough cream, badly dipped. You name it, I got it wrong for some reason. So it was with some relief that my father put me in charge of donuts. Now, I don't know how technology has altered the course of donut production over the last 40 years, but back then it was a manual process. The jammer was connected to a one-way pump, which was attached to a lever. On the opposite side was what I can only describe as the injector. The technique was to prime the injector by pumping the lever a few times, press it firmly into the donut, and then pump. This injected a good heaped teaspoonful of jam right into the centre of the donut. Hey presto, job done.
Needing a donut right now.
Sounding
Right
good,
now.
isn't it, really? One morning, having carefully produced about 12 dozen donuts, I found myself with one donut left and rather too much jam remaining. I know you're ahead of me. There wasn't really enough to scoop out and put it back into the jam barrel. So what to do with the excess jam? Bit of a dilemma. So spiking the donut as usual, I gave it a pump. And then another, and another, and another. After about 5 or 6 pumps, the donut started to expand. I extracted the injector and jam started to ooze out. I quickly plugged the hole with a piece of raw dough and carefully placed this last incredibly large donut on top of all the others. It was a little bit deformed, but it was huge and magnificent. I then proceeded to deliver the tray of donuts downstairs to the shop. Weaving my way through the busy tea rooms, I heard this voice, alarmingly reminiscent of Dame Edith Evans. Ask your parents. No, actually, ask your grandparents.
Yes, I was going to say.
Call out loudly and clearly, cutting through the general hubbub. Young man, be so kind as to bring me one of your donuts, please. I'm imagining that's Dame
No,
Edith Evans. I haven't
you're
checked
spot
something
on.
like that.
Yeah.
I stopped in my tracks and turned. Sitting alone at a small table in an alcove was what I could only describe as a rather intimidating, serious-looking lady of a certain age. She was what I suppose one might describe as an old English eccentric. Half-moon glasses, heavy tweed suit, brogue shoes, feather hat, and her neck and shoulders draped in faux fur and pearls. It's like Elaine Page, isn't it, really, on a standard Sunday? Not being my... Sorry, it's Elaine Page. OBE.
Yeah.
Not being my job to serve customers, I frantically looked round for some assistance. Luckily, Mary, one of the waitresses, noticed my predicament. I'm imagining Mary now being played by Lily James, I think, in this
Okay.
particular role. Noticed my predicament and trotted over to my lady's table. "Can I help you, madam?" Mary asked earnestly. "Yes, you may," replied the lady. "Tell that young man to bring me one of his donuts." "Let me fetch one for you," said Mary, and with that she walked over, tongs in hand. "Anyone in particular?" Mary asked. "I'll have that particularly large one on top," she ordered.
Really?
Before I could reply, Mary grabbed the somewhat pregnant-looking donut from the pile, turned and then returned to the table. For a moment, I thought about trying to say something, but I couldn't think of what to say, so I moved quickly, wanting to make myself absent, but also wanting to see what happened next. Still clutching my tray of remaining donuts and trying to appear as innocent as possible, I peered round the corner just in time to see the dame pick up and examine her donut. Then, as she slowly looked round to make sure no one was looking, she took a large bite. It's hard to describe precisely the next few minutes of carnage. The jam, obviously under some considerable pressure and taking the path of least resistance, exploded upwards and outwards in a quite spectacular fashion. If I hadn't witnessed with my own eyes, I would never have believed that a preserve could cause quite so much damage. Her entire face, glasses and feather hat literally dripped with bright red raspberry jam. Some had even squirted higher and over her shoulder and was slowly sliding down the wall behind her like a scene from Dexter. With an increasing level of horror, I could see that the fur had taken the brunt of the explosion, now more closely resembling fresh roadkill rather than a highly questionable fashion accessory. The whole scene brought to mind something out of a slasher movie. Dear young Mary, who is Lily James, remember, flew to the rescue, napkins and cloth in hand, and attempted to clear up as much as she could. The dame looked up at the poor flustered waitress and with an extraordinary degree of understatement said, "Somewhat generous with the jam, don't you think?" Needless to say, I made myself scarce and headed back upstairs. Some minutes later, I sensed my father standing behind me. "A word, please," he said, pointing to his office. "Do I take it you had something to do with that donut incident downstairs?" he asked. "What incident?" I replied somewhat pathetically. "The incident with Lady Appleby Blower," came the sharp reply. Lady Appleby Blower is an old and valued customer, and I have spent the last 10 minutes doing my best to apologise for the excess of jam in her donut. A phrase I found very funny. And have done ever since.
Goodness.
That and having to contribute 10 shillings towards her dry cleaning bill. Asked your parents again. "What have you got to say for yourself?" he barked. "Well, I might have put in an extra squirt or two," I stammered. He gave me a long, hard stare, and then, quite suddenly, a little smile played on his lips. "Well, she's the most insufferable woman. Don't do it again, and I'm deducting 10 shillings from your wages to pay for the dry cleaning and go somewhere towards meeting the cost of wasting my jam." Anyway, and he left. So nearly 50 years on, I finally seek forgiveness, not from my father, who, bless him, has long since iced his last bun, nor indeed from Lady Appleby Blower. I do, however, seek forgiveness from dear young innocent Mary, who had not only to clear up the mess and incur the wrath of Lady A.B., but also receive a thoroughly undeserved dressing down from my father. Doubtless for the sake of appearances, I never did own up to her, despite more than a couple of very cool stares when I next made a downstairs visit. So, dear collective, I hope you will see this as nothing more than a teenage prank, a result of boredom and youthful exuberance, plus a touch of cowardice for not owning up to dear Lily James. Okay, well, you knew exactly where it was heading. It just so happened that it was Lady Appleby Blower. Who knew? Sister Bobby.
What a lovely, well-written story that was.
Nice,
that was
wasn't it,
gorgeous. Yes, Simon the Pieman, so well done for that. What I do love
I
is
might
your
submit
dad.
that for the 500 words competition. It's not too late.
You need to do a recount, I think. Your dad is fantastic. I love your dad. Your dad is salt of the earth. And, of course, he gave you what you needed, which was a good telling off, but also understood your sense of fun. I always think there's not enough jam in a donut. So I think one teaspoonful enough.
If you knew it was coming, that would still be the greatest donut ever if you were prepared.
Yeah, what surprised me about Dame Appleby Blower is I thought she was the kind of woman to actually cut it. I mean, we all know you bite into a donut, that's half the fun, is it catching the jam dribbling down your chin. So I thought she was going to be a cutter and a cake forker. So I love her even more, the fact that she went for it in the traditional way. But I think you got your comeuppance, you got told off. I think this time, because it's the little, what's the waitress's name?
Lily
So it was
James.
Lily. So it was Lily. I think she'll forgive you. She'll be fine. She obviously enjoyed the fun. You're forgiven.
Brother Matthew.
Well, here's the thing. This is very much a sort of like a Buster Keaton movie. This really, isn't it? With the jam all over the face, a very great visual gag. But we would have all loved to have had that particular donut. I'm with Bobby on this. There's far too little jam in my donuts, and I would definitely be going for one of these. What a joy to be alive when you get a donut full of jam. It's like when you get a Kit Kat and it's 100% chocolate. It's like, oh, this is so heaven. I definitely have got, and my guess is there will have been customers there going, oh, we are coming back here and we are having one of those donuts with all the jam in it. So nothing to forgive, because I'll bet there's been queues round the block. When can I get the exploding donut?
The Confessions Podcast.
Father Simon and the Restorers of Righteousness. That's pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah.
My tale happened on December the 17th, just last year.
Oh, good. Even better.
So
Love
this
these.
is pretty
yeah.
fresh.
Yeah.
My wife and I were expecting our third child, and it was imminent. Wasn't entirely expected, this new baby, so I was working very hard trying to make as many shifts as possible, especially doing night work as I received double time. I also got paid some sleep time. Fortunately, my manager understood my situation and was happy for me to work the extra hours. Needed the cash, do more work, that's the way it was. On the night in question, I was working on a site a couple of hours away from home and had started a job working on something which couldn't be abandoned, otherwise some people in an unnamed town would be missing an important utility in the morning. That's as specific as Barry gets. I'm sure you understand that I was involved in vital work. Mm-hmm. Certainly my wife did, so all was well.
I'm with you.
Bobby's looking suspicious.
No, I'm with you. I'm thinking, which one?
It was at this moment, as my important work is taking all my attention, that the unborn baby decides to begin its arrival into the world. My wife rings, but knowing I couldn't get back anytime soon, I said I'll just finish the job and I'll rush back as quickly as I can. She was a little bit nervous, but was able to hold on. That's what she said. I sounded as reassuring as possible, as I could hear she was anxious, but my words worked their magic. By the time I got back, she'd probably be ready to go into hospital. That's what I thought. I went back to my work. I tried to work as fast as I could. I got back home at 3:15 a.m., slightly later than planned. My wife was obviously mightily relieved, let me tell you. We then set off to hospital, and a couple of hours later, we had our little girl. Everything went to plan. But now, I should tell you the terrible truth about the situation. I'd love to do a poll at this point as to what do you think Barry was doing. I wasn't really working that night. I was actually at a midnight showing of the latest Star Wars film.
No!
That's why I mentioned December the 17th. December the 17th will have had a few... was December the 17th? I'm sure I was doing something. I'm a bit of a super fan, you see. As you know, Father Simon, this was the much-anticipated Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi, the unmissable next instalment with Rey and Luke and Leia and Kylo Ren. Some things just can't wait. My wife rang about 5 minutes before I went into the cinema. I had my tickets and suitable cinema snacks in tow. I thought I'd have time to watch the film and get back. The cinema is only 10 minutes away from my house. I would have told my wife the truth, but I feared that she would have told me to immediately return home.
Really? Yeah, I think she probably would.
For fear that she could go into labour, and I really, really, really needed to watch this film. I thought it was actually unlikely that she'd go into labour that quickly. So now I need to ask forgiveness, though. Here's the clincher, right? I'm not asking for forgiveness from my wife or my child, as all ended well. And I was there for the birth, and I was being a supportive dad at the time. Nor do I ask forgiveness from my mum, who in my absence had to become emergency babysitter and support my wife as I was, in quotes, travelling home from work. I do ask for forgiveness from the cinema and the people sat around me for not obeying the correct cinema etiquette and turning my phone off. I must have ruined their enjoyment of the much-anticipated film by constantly looking at my phone for regular updates from both my wife and my mum, and of course I had to send one or two back every now and again just to update them as to how my work was progressing.
This is not good.
I hope to get your forgiveness. Now, I'm guessing here, though, Barry doesn't make it clear. I don't think Barry has told anybody, and I don't think Barry's other half will know either. So, not only has he broken the cinema code, the code of conduct, in which clearly you have to turn your phone off.
Yeah.
You certainly don't text. You certainly don't send messages. You don't take any calls. But most important thing, you weren't at home and you lied to your wife. I mean, it's one of those where, well, let's see how this goes. Bobby's not looking too hot here.
Well, no, I'm just looking at you going, well, it's nothing to do with the phone call in the cinema. That's a kind of afterthought. If that's your main priority, you're in trouble too, mate. Barry, What did you expect, Barry, by writing in? I'm really surprised that you even had the courage to write in.
He's not asking for forgiveness from his wife either.
I know,
That's
it's
the key.
What annoys me about this is you said the much anticipated Star Wars film.
Yeah.
What about your much anticipated daughter?
Oh, well,
you know, it's one of those things. Which were you most excited by? Don't answer that,
Don't
please.
answer that.
Don't answer that, because I can already see trouble. Barry, did you really expect me to forgive you? Did you really expect me?
He's juggling the hours, isn't he? He's thinking, I can see this film and be home for the baby.
No,
That's what
because
he's
it
thinking.
all's well that ends well. Yeah, no thanks to you, because of course your wife is carrying the burden. I can't. How can I possibly forgive you, Barry? You're an absolute disappointment to man, and I'm being specific here, to mankind. Shame on you.
Yeah, well, I suspect that Bobby might have been speaking for the nation, but you never know. Let's see what Matt makes
well,
of it.
here's the thing. I mean, obviously, your other family on 5 Live that we never talk about, but you know,
On the movie show, on the film
yes,
show.
on the movie show. This was a clear breach of the code of conduct there,
was.
of not only taking your phone in and texting and receiving text, but also taking in snacks. It's 3 strikes there as far as you're concerned
Very
there.
poor.
But and how on earth were you able to concentrate on the movie if you're constantly looking down at your phone and thinking, oh, should I have left? But I'm going to forgive, because, you know, in the way, it all worked out fine in the end, didn't it? I mean, apart from, obviously, the other people in the cinema who had their enjoyment ruined.
Got to be unforgiven on every count, Matt, hasn't it?
And no, it's. I mean, you know, which of us can honestly say we've almost missed the birth of a child because of the cinema?
Bobby,
I mean, none of us can really
Bobby
hold
wants to
up
come
our
back in here.
hands there and say that. So I am going to forgive, because, you know, we've all been there.
No, we haven't been there. This is just you talking about you.
So, you know, it was a good movie.
Okay.
Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
That was Barry's confession, you're so far away from me. Now, if you're otherwise engaged with very important matters when Barry's confession went out on air, because apparently some people have things to do, you'd have missed on the reaction on the people's verdict. So just for you guys with important jobs, when I say guy, I'm obviously using that generically.
Obviously.
Here's one of our favourite responses. Barry, totally forgiven. I wouldn't have missed the new Star Wars film, even if I was in labour myself, says Helen. I think you might have done, Helen.
Yeah.
Anyway, still to come, find out why this seemingly ordinary piece of countryside furniture made Matt and Bobby react like this, approaching a stile from opposite directions.
Keep going.
Anyway, more of that in a moment, when I do indeed keep going.
You do,
At Bobby's
don't you
suggestion.
just?
Anyway, over to the parish notice board. It is a beautiful thing, and it's adorned as it is with all the new correspondence we've received this week, including photographic evidence of podcast subscriptions. Aren't we all loved? I think we might be. Bobby, who's caught your eye this week?
Well, it's Stephen, who's deep in deepest, darkest Cornwall. He emailed in to say, hello, Simon, and your fabulous
Hello, Stephen.
colleagues of justice. Obviously,
Yes.
that's Matt and
Yeah.
myself. This week, whilst visiting my local church with my sister to clean the brasses, I was tempted to lighten the mood and catch up on last week's podcast. I was all ready to go, took the obligatory photo with the proof. Then he absolutely bottled it when a visitor entered the church. He says, I tried, I'm sorry, but I just couldn't do it after that, so it's back to listening in the privacy of home. Anyhow, a photo of podcasts and church brasses should brighten up the already illuminated notice board.
Yeah, so there's a... Oh, I see. It was upside down. So there's the phone, and what looks as though it could be a very hefty candlestick
Okay.
with
So-
which to beat someone around the head.
Right.
No, I think it's part
If it
of
was
the...
Cluedo.
Yes, no, we got
Just
the
that.
Cluedo, yeah.
It's part of the altar display, I imagine.
Yes,
and I
I
like the
imagine
idea
it
of going into church and having a chuckle. I think that's okay, but he didn't want to laugh.
To be honest, this podcast is not really designed for listening to in church. In
Well,
public.
yes, but if
Isn't
you're
it?
cleaning...
Absolutely, we are the only podcast designed for listening to in church, surely.
I mean,
I mean,
yes.
Confessions Podcast. It's in the title.
Okay,
You know.
that's true. Did you have something else to say, Bobby? There, or were you being spoken over by
Sorry.
Matt?
Is that me again?
If you've got to clean the brasses and do the flowers and sweep the floor and do your church duties, it's quite nice that you have something to listen to.
That's very true. And,
Yes, correct.
and I
Thanks,
would-
Stephen.
I think you're absolutely right, Stephen. Thank you very much indeed. If we had any stickers left,
we haven't got any stickers left.
I think they're all gone. Are they? All gone.
All gone?
Can we get some made? Some special ones? Oh, I don't know how that works. Anyway, why don't we just take stuff from Graham Norton's cupboard, because they have stuff, don't they?
Did you say your mum had one on the back of her car?
How?
Can't we take that off her?
Yes.
Can we borrow it for a few
I
months?
think she wants it.
Oh.
How about we just give away stuff from other shows? So Steve Wright, I chose the oldies badges. Why don't we give those away? They've got thousands.
Because we'd have to confess that we stole things from other people's cupboards.
That's fine.
I think it's in the nature of this piece that we can give away anything that we want as long as we confess to it.
Yes, I'm happy to do that.
How about
no
taking
problem.
stuff from management offices?
No.
Like
Now
gold
we're
discs,
talking.
gold discs, stereo
Yes.
equipment, that kind of thing. Let's see what we can do. Anyway, we'll have a word. Matt, you've got something there.
Yes, Andrew emailed in to say, Dear Father Simon and the brother and sister of Murphy, very good.
I like it.
As a veteran of the Confessions podcast, I listened with interest to the listener who wrote in to complain that the all-new podcast was too long. These are, of course, different times. The introduction of Matt and Bobby add a great new dimension to what was a solid base under Monsignor Mayo. But frankly...
Solid base?
Solid base. The old format might only have registered 3-star on iTunes. Accordingly, I have upped you to 5 stars. However, am I alone in thinking that it's at times like these that I wonder what would novice Nige say? Surely the addition of Nige to the podcast would add even more layers to this fine production, however random and nonsensical those layers might be.
You've answered your own point.
And it might allow you all to get another fine meal out of him in the process.
Well, it's an interesting point, but you have answered everything there, Andrew, in that email. If you want some more Nigel, he does turn up in our Confession from the Crypt.
Yes.
And in fact provides all the evidence that you need as to why he's not invited on.
Aww.
In the nicest, loving possible way.
Obviously.
I don't think he downloads this.
No.
Anyway, time now for our weekly trawl through the gutter. So here come the confessions that haven't made the cut for reasons of brazen immorality, basically. Sex, violence, disturbing images, maybe in some cases all of them. David, at a nightclub screening of the new Thriller video in 1983, jumping out and scaring your older brother's girlfriend during the jump movement might have seemed like harmless fun. This turned out not to be the case, however, because A, it actually turned out to be a complete stranger and not your brother's girlfriend. And B, your actions made the woman in question have a little bathroom accident
Oh, dear.
in a room full of hundreds of people, and clearly you misjudged that,
Right.
as indeed did she.
But the intention was just for fun.
I mean, clearly it was,
Yeah.
but, it's unintended consequences.
We don't condone Screaming Dave's tale either about dropping a pole from a second-floor classroom window, missing a passing teacher's head by a few inches.
No.
The pole apparently cracked a pavement tile clean in half, and schoolboy tomfoolery is no excuse for this near-deadly confession. It is terrible behaviour and very bad.
We're not talking a person pole.
No,
Polish
I think it
person.
is.
No,
I don't think. I think that would be.
Because that would be doubly bad.
I think so.
Yes.
On balance, attempted murder is not. That would be a Super X certificate.
Or
one.
just to see if he could bounce. You know how.
No, I don't think.
no.
GBH. That's not. That is not.
Super.
That's not there. Nick, the lazy steward, you were so focused on the rugby bench you were supposed to be stewarding, you failed to notice some spectators using the back gates as an emergency toilet. If you'd been paying attention, you would surely have noticed this, and the fact the liquid rolled down a slope,
Oh, no.
dripping onto the heads of the spectators in the
What?
bottom stand.
Oh, dear
Dereliction
me.
of duty, is it raining? No, it's Nick the lazy
No.
steward who hasn't spotted what's going on.
I mean, there's other people who bear some responsibility there, surely.
I was going to say it's not entirely Nick's fault.
No. I mean, come on.
Do you think? And Mr. P, knowing you weren't great with fairground rides,
Oh, we know what's coming. Go on.
you still went on one of those ones that propels you in the air in
Yep.
order to impress your new date. Let's just say the regurgitator would have been a fitting name for the ride, given what happened next. And to make matters worse, instead of apologising to the angry crowd, who are now covered in the contents of your dinner,
what?
you scarpered as soon as the ride finished, leaving your date to deal with the mob. The angry mob with pitchforks.
I did that though.
What? Really?
What?
On the man I loved.
You vommed?
Yeah.
On a ride?
On the pirate ship, because he was trying to outdo me and I wasn't going to be outdone on fairground rides because I loved them.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it got to the pirate ship and my dinner ended up
So
on
where
him.
was he? Was he next
No,
to you?
yes, and he had my... Yeah.
But
He
he,
had
he
your-
was asking for it, though, wasn't he, really? All cocky and, oh, look, I can
Yeah.
cope, I can cope with everything. Oh,
And
Bobby,
what about the people in front, stroke
No,
behind?
it was just on him. So there you go.
Oh, lovely.
Anyway,
Yes.
did he, what did he say?
Well, I had to go home because I was ill for 3 days
Oh, right.
because I'd made myself so ill.
Right. 3 days. That was a bad attack.
It was very bad.
Anyway, just to be clear, absolutely none of these are okay.
No, absolutely, we don't condone any of that.
And they're not funny.
No.
Confessions at bbc.co.uk if you have something for us, by the way. We received another U-rated confession. When we get these are always nursery, these are primary school kids. This one comes from Robert, age 5, but nearly 6. And this note from his mum accompanied the confession, okay? Simon and the team, I helped Robert confess his sin and typed out his letter word for word as he was sat next to me at the computer. I think this was punishment enough for his crime as he wasn't allowed to play. Although I told him off, I was amazed by his devious behaviour. Please forgive my lovely little boy, says Kate. Can we have a sticker to put on his bedroom window? Well, maybe I'll peel the one off my mother's car.
That's what we're reduced to now.
Okay, so here is the confession, which comes from Robert, age 5, but nearly 6.
Okay.
Dear Mr. Mayo and his friends on the radio, Mummy listens to your show when she's making tea for me and my sister. She laughs a lot. At Christmas, Mummy put little string sacks of chocolate on the tree for me and my sister, telling us that we must ask before taking them to eat. Mummy said there were 4 each. Mine were gold coins and my sister's were Santas. As in chocolate centres. As my sister was always mean to me, I decided to play a trick on her. I'd eaten all my coins, so decided to take one of her bags of Santas off the tree when no one was looking and hide them. The next day I heard Mummy telling my sister off for taking chocolates off the tree without asking. She was crying, saying she hadn't done that, and she'd always ask. My mum didn't believe her and told her what a naughty girl she'd been, and she wouldn't be allowed any more treats over Christmas. Ha!
Not a lot of remorse so far.
I had hidden the stolen chocolates in my bedroom. I only ate a couple of the Santas. I then forgot about them until this week when I was looking for a favourite toy under my bed. Yesterday I told Mummy about this and she said this was a wicked trick to play on my sister and I had got her into a lot of trouble. I should be sorry. She said the best way to show how sorry I was would be to give the chocolates away, and she suggested you.
Yes.
She also has asked me to say sorry to my sister and give her a hug. I don't want to do this.
Good for you.
As she is always mean to me.
Yes.
But I might have to. These are the chocolates.
Oh, so you've got one each.
So giving the chocolates away, but not back to his sister. Chocolate Santa for you, Bobby. Chocolate Santa.
Look at this.
Robert, 5, nearly 6.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you so much for
Santa
this.
for me.
I'm going to totally have this now.
I mean, hug your sister, and I think your sister is probably just now realising that she needs to be much nicer to you because one day she'll need you.
Yes, she will. But atone for with the chocolates.
Can I just say, as indeed we all need each other.
Don't we, though?
We do.
In a way.
So, thanks for the chocolate Santas. This is very good. Feel free to send us things.
Yes, please. Chocolate.
So we forgive him anyway. Yeah. So we've looked behind a cupboard and we found one last car sticker. Apparently, it's the latest news. So I don't know how that happened miraculously. Probably just because
half hour.
Just because I threatened to peel the one off my mum's car. Oh no, don't do that. We found a secret supply of one. Anyway, if you don't have a sticker, there is another way that you can show how much you love this podcast. In March, the British Podcast Awards opens up applications for the Listener's Choice Award, which is a public vote chosen by podcast listeners. Wouldn't it be great if, just for example, I mean possibly, the confessional parish members voted for this podcast when the vote opens? They might choose anything. They might choose, I don't know, Test Match Special, but why would you?
Why would you? I mean, they get everything. Yes. I mean, we're not going to lead the jury, but come on.
The Wittertainment podcast is very good, and I'd encourage that.
I wonder who presents that, though.
Anyway, enough of this. Here comes Ken Fry's confession, cluck, cluck, clucking on heaven's door.
The Confessions Podcast.
Father Simon and Company, when asked in job interviews to detail a time when I have demonstrated ingenuity in resolving an issue, this is always the first story that springs to mind, but one I can never actually tell, at least not in that context. But maybe now, in the context of current events, it's the time to give my fast food chicken experience a wider airing.
It is topical, yeah.
As it was about 16 years ago, any chicken-related statute of limitations must surely have passed. At the time, I lived in a village in Ayrshire, and my house was handily about 100 metres from this well-known Southern American originating best-in-a-bucket chicken restaurant.
Yeah.
You know, the one that can't actually sell chicken at the moment. Because they haven't got any. On the evening in question, I arrived home at about 11:30 p.m. after having had a few beers, and I decided some chicken in a bucket would be The perfect end to the evening. The way you do. It's that kind of food. So knowing this branch opened until midnight, I staggered down to the restaurant, salivating at the thought of a big bucket of chicken. However, when I got there, the young chap behind the counter said that they were all out of chicken, a sign of things to come, I think, and he wouldn't be putting any more on to cook because it's so close to closing. Well, I was incensed, as only an inebriated person can be, and after much skilled verbal jousting, demands to see the manager, who it turned out wasn't there. Because that's the point of being a manager. You're not there at 5 to midnight.
Yeah, correct.
That's why you have underlings.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
I wobbled out of the door. On the way out, though, I noticed a customer complaints number on the wall, which began 01563, and an idea struck me. When I got back home, I looked up the number of the restaurant I'd just been in and called it. And when the young lad I'd just been speaking to answered the phone, I told him I was calling from the customer complaints team based in Kilmarnock, which, as you might have worked out by now, has the 01563 code. I put on my best management voice. I advised the chap that we'd received a complaint from a customer who was unable to buy any chicken, even though the restaurant was still open for another half hour. I said in a kind of matey but managerial way that I knew it wasn't his fault, but I needed to speak to the manager. When he said the manager wasn't there, which I knew, obviously, I sounded very solemn. Well, I said, maybe you can help me. Obviously wanting to score points, he then volunteered, do you want me to put some more chicken on and then you can ask him to come back? That would be wonderful, I replied. Before going on to say something about him embodying the spirit of our well-known Southern American originating best-in-a-bucket chicken restaurant franchise, whatever that meant.
Yep.
I also asked him his name and might even have promised him some sort of recognition in the company's monthly magazine, The Poultry Post. Not to be confused with Wings Weekly, obviously. I might even have said he'd have been on the front cover as Employee of the Month. My final flourish was to ask him to put some chips on too. Because you never know, he might be hungry. And I heartily thanked him for his assistance. I then said I would call the customer back and advise him to pop back along. Placing the phone down, I congratulated myself for my incredible ingenuity and went back to the shop, arriving after midnight. The young chap had to unlock the doors to let me in, and I was presented with the most magnificent bucket of chicken, a big bucket of chips, and an ice cream thrown in. It was delicious. Now, even though I am confessing, now it occurs to me, no one got hurt. I got my chicken. The restaurant got paid. It wasn't a malicious call. In fact, I consider it one of my finest achievements. I ought to seek forgiveness from someone, though, because obviously that's the nature of the gig. So I will apologise to the young chap at the restaurant who probably thought he was going home early and then had to stay later to cook my chicken. And also, Ken was probably expecting to be in the company monthly magazine. But nothing happened there either. Anyway, Ken says, beyond that, I'm not very sorry anyway. Anyway, it's a topical story. It is ingenious. Feel sorry for the guy who was desperate to go home. 5 to midnight. You don't want a customer coming in. I'm not going to have a vegetable wrap or something. Anyway, maybe that's not what you fancy. Maybe they don't even do them. I don't know.
Bobby might. There you go.
Bobby, what do you say about
I find this quite difficult because I appreciate both sides, but it does say it is open till midnight. That's what it says. And I understand there are chefs out there and you don't want your last orders coming in when you think your kitchen's cleared up and then someone comes and orders a big dinner at 5 to 10 when the restaurant closes at 10. I understand the frustration, but that's it. It is open till midnight. It's not open till 11:30 for last orders. It is open till midnight. So, in the interest of the business, that's what you should have done. However, can I just add a thing here? Had you gone to a fish and chip shop, they'd have fried you a fish. That's what I reckon.
Well, as J.J. Cale said, after midnight, you've got to let it all hang out. So that wouldn't have helped very much. Anyway, Nigel.
You're forgiven.
As long as it doesn't end up in the fryer, that's all. I actually thought he called him a moron because he said he couldn't put any more on, but it took me a while to work out. But Ken was not a moron. But as Bobby's quite rightly, the idea, it's famed for selling chicken, and they haven't got any chicken. It's absurd at 11:30, and sounds like they haven't got any chips either. So, Ken, you were completely right and well improvised. You need an enterprise grant for that. Well done to you, poultry post or otherwise. Completely forgiven.
Brother Matthew.
I mean, obviously, this is not fair for the guy who's left in the restaurant, who's got to, because he's going to have to clean up after having made all that chicken and the chips. However, it is ingenious, and why wouldn't you use this in a job interview where you do get these ridiculous questions of tell us about a time where you've had to use ingenuity. What's your biggest weakness? Frankly, just because those are dreadful questions, they always are, and how they find out anything about candidates from them, I have no idea. I am going to forgive.
This is the place where penitents seek our pardon for their sins. Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
Good afternoon, Father Simon. Good afternoon, A. The incident I wish to confess to occurred on a balmy summer's evening in 2002, when our parents were due to join our usual routine of walking the dog. Just so happened that evening that some close friends had popped in, so it was decided that the men in the party would stay at home and discuss important sporting matters. Isn't it odd that every man seems to be able to manage their given football team better than the current incumbent?
Yep.
How is that possible? Anyway, so with a flurry of barking, shoes going on, and a bottleneck of bodies in the hallway, we all set off. Oh, it's a bit chilly, says Grandma, as soon as we'd emerged from the house. Don't worry, Mum, you can borrow one of my jackets, says I, and I went back to grab a coat for her. Now, I should probably point out at this juncture that the whole family's sense of humour could be described as basically lavatorial, which hopefully excuses what comes next. Rebecca rolls her eyes at this point.
Okay.
On the way out of the door, I spotted my son's, how shall I say, flatulence machine lying on the table. And without another thought, I slipped the gadget into the pocket of the jacket I was lending to my mother.
This is already superb.
The grandmother of the clan. But I kept hold of the device's remote control for myself. Here you go, Mum, this will keep you warm, I said, and kindly voice, and we headed off to the local wildlife reserve. So much fun. As we walked across a wood... Rebecca's rolling her eyes.
Yeah.
As we walked across a wooden walkway, I spotted a lone gentleman making his way towards us, and sensing an opportunity, I encouraged everyone else to walk faster, leaving Grandma lagging behind. Cheer up, Grandma! We must have been 30 metres ahead and approaching a wooded area when I looked back to see both the gentleman and Grandma approaching a stile from opposite directions.
Keep going.
I was right to describe this chap as being a gentleman, as he was patiently waiting for Grandma to negotiate the style. But it's not that funny. But as her left leg was raised, and she was about to shift her weight over the stile, I realised that this was my moment, and not even knowing if the flatulence machine's remote would work from so far away, I pressed the big red button. Even if the remote did work, would we even be able to hear it from so far away? How would we know? Well, I needn't have worried, as it became apparent pretty quickly that something had occurred. As we looked on from behind the trees, the scene before us seemed to freeze, with Grandma's leg abruptly stopped mid-air, and the unsuspecting gentleman's head shooting up to look at her directly in the eye. The tension seemed to have frozen everyone in place, and looking back, I think we might still have been there had it not been for the twitch on my finger. You see, I involuntarily pressed the remote again, which seemed to galvanise everyone into action. Grandma started protesting and gesticulating wildly in our direction, which had the direct effect of some of us losing the use of our legs from laughing, while other members of the family had gone a funny puce colour and were having trouble breathing. Never in my wildest imagination did I think the scene would unfold so spectacularly, and we were still in a condition of heightened amusement when Grandma finally came bowling up to us. She then recounted the conversation with the gentleman, explaining that he'd actually jumped backwards on hearing the second noise. No, no, Grandma had shouted at the man as he landed back on his feet. It's a machine. Oh, don't worry, madam, he'd apparently replied. It's perfectly natural.
Yes, it is.
No, it's them, she screamed. It's all right, madam, we all do it, said the gentleman. Anyway, we were still recovering when, to add insult to injury, I pressed the button again, made Grandma jump, and it sent us back into apocalyptic laughter. Father Simon, I need forgiveness for embarrassing the gentleman, humiliating my mum, and possibly being a bad influence on my 2 children as they have grown up to enjoy these jokes. It wouldn't surprise me if they didn't have a few confessions of their own. You see, basically, it's the Beano in a confession. I mean, it's a straightforward comic extract, this tale. It's just that it was the juxtaposition of the gentleman with the style and the raised leg. Perfect timing from A. What do you say, Sister Bobby?
Bottom burps in the mist, eh? It's fantastic. I didn't know you could get a machine. I know the whoopee cushion. I bought several whoopee cushions. I've got loads at home. They're fantastic. I didn't know the machine existed, so I'm off to buy one as soon as I can. What I love about this is the kind of choreography that's involved, the kind of timing, everything absolutely perfect. So it sounds like the grandma is actually quite kind of got a great sense of humour. I don't think you really embarrassed her. I mean, she went with it and she loved it. So in the fact that the old man, I don't think was embarrassed, and he probably had a good chuckle himself and told the story when he got home. I don't think you humiliated your grandma. You're forgiven for that. And as for being a bad influence on your children, it is your obligation to be a bad influence this way. Yeah. So like forgiven.
I like the idea of Grandma pointing at the woods saying it's them, and they're all hiding behind trees, and he's going, yeah, okay, it's fine.
Whatever.
Brother Matthew.
I love this. Obviously, this has brightened my day no end. And who'd have thought when you get those remote machines? Because I don't think we haven't got one of them. But oh my goodness, I wish I did. And I didn't know they worked from that far away. Oh, the opportunities are endless. But there is none better than when somebody has their leg raised trying to get over a stile.
With a gentleman on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Oh my Lord. Yes, definitely forgiven. Well done.
Don't worry, madam, it's perfectly natural.
Yes, happens to the best of us.
Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
Now, that was A's tale, The Wind Beneath My Wings, which provoked this reaction on the People's Verdict. Amanda, forgiven. Someone hid one under my friend's car seat and pressed the button as she wound her window down to hand over a ticket to drive onto the Isle of Wight car ferry. And that is the end of this week's Confessions. Maybe it inspired you to send in one of yours. I'll give you the email before we finish. But before we go, another treat from the Confessions crypt. This week, it's been requested by Leslie in Bracknell, who emailed to say, I recollect one confession which left me jaw agape and cheering on a young married woman who could never please her hypercritical mother-in-law. Alas, I do not remember which year it was, but I'm guessing, hazarding 2012, 2013. I beg most humbly that you amuse the nation with this gem of a story, yours in anticipation whilst roasting a fine joint of meat in a pet-free kitchen. Here's the one we called, Where's the Beef, Chief?
The Confessions Podcast.
Father Simon, you're a forgiving bunch of folk. Early in our marriage, we invited my husband's parents over for Sunday lunch. This was a major undertaking for me because my mother-in-law had never liked me and criticised my attempts at wifely duties at every opportunity. I was determined to give her a meal she couldn't criticise. For moral support, I invited my sister and her boyfriend, and the cost of the roast for the 6 of us was extortionate. In fact, it cost about half of my weekly shopping budget. I had chosen a really superb piece of Scottish beef. This was in the days when you could buy beef on the bone, and inexperienced as I was, I asked my butcher to bone the joint for me. He happily obliged, it was really expensive, and gave me a few tips on roasting the joint to make it even more delicious. How's it going so far then, Nigel?
Yeah, very good. And I like it on the bones, but she's taking it off. But there you go.
On the Sunday morning, I meticulously prepared the meat for roasting and spent ages shaping the roast potatoes and carrots, making them as professional as possible. I baked an actual apple pie for dessert and made my own custard from scratch. Everything was looking great. The roast was browning beautifully. When my sister arrived, I felt relaxed enough to join her in a glass of wine. You'll all now think that I got squiffy and burnt the dinner, but believe me, it's much worse than that. The joint was at the point where it needed to come out of the oven to rest for 20 minutes, and I'd carefully placed it on the kitchen table under foil to keep warm when the doorbell rang. It was my in-laws. My new husband, my sister and her boyfriend were in the back garden with the dogs, 2 border terriers. My husband obviously couldn't hear me call, and I was calling him to go and answer the door, but he'd didn't budge. So leaving my cooking and wiping my hands on my apron, I went to let the in-laws in. My mother-in-law was frosty. She'd waited a good minute and a half. I'd answered the door, and she clearly didn't like the dress that I was wearing or my haircut, or indeed the fact that I was alive. Her first words were, "Where's Paul?" as if I'd tied him up and hidden him in the cellar. Luckily at this point, the other guests and my husband came in from the garden. Coats were taken and wine was poured. After a couple of minutes, I excused myself to go back to the cooking. When I got back into the kitchen, the first thing I noticed was shredded tinfoil over the floor, and for a second I was baffled until I realised that the roast was missing. Horrified, I looked out to the kitchen window where my 2 dogs, as you might have guessed, were running around the garden with the joint in their mouths, pulling at it like a rag doll between them.
Animals.
Well, they are.
Yeah.
I mean,
I know.
dog-like behaviour. In a matter of seconds, I was in the garden trying to catch them to take the joint away from them, but because I couldn't shout at them, as everyone indoors would have heard, I was frantically whispering threats and supplications as they romped around with my very expensive dinner in their jaws, believing they were engaged in a huge game with the added benefit of something very yummy at the end of it. Eventually I managed to get hold of them and extricate the meat from their mouths. As I carried it back into the kitchen, I patted down the bits where they had chewed and wiped off some of the dirt, the grass, and dog snark, says Ginger. I'm not sure of that phrase.
Yeah.
What-
Yeah. Well, I think we know what it is, don't we?
I think we know what it is. It's a nice phrase. I haven't heard it before. I had just put the joint back into the roasting tin, chewed side down, when my mother-in-law walked in, obviously looking for something to sneer at. She commented on the size and obvious quality of the meat, and by now in a state of almost total nervous collapse, I witted on almost hysterically about how very expensive it was. I'd bought it from the very best butcher. Now the butcher had very kindly boned the joint and given me tips for cooking it. She sniffed and warned me that the proof would be in the eating. Well, members of the confessional, the meal, I have to tell you, was an outstanding success, to such a degree that my mother-in-law was almost powerless to criticise. Everyone, except her, commented on how beautiful the meal looked, how crisp and flavoursome the vegetables were, and how mouth-wateringly tender the joint was. I regaled everyone again, by this time I was a little squiffy with relief, with the story of the best cut of meat, the best butcher, and how kind he was to bone my choice of joint. It was an absolute triumph, right up to the point where my mother-in-law, wincing, pulled a small piece of meat from her mouth and peered at it and announced, delightedly, "Well, your butcher can't be that good. Look, he's left a sliver of bone in." Well, it made her day, says Ginger. However, I don't ask forgiveness for the crime of serving meat which I had pulled from the slavering jaws of 2 dogs. No one knew. Everyone enjoyed it. Now, if possible, all these years later, I'd like to apologise for the damage done to the reputation of the man who boned my beef, because he really hadn't left a sliver in there at all. What my mother-in-law failed to realise, and which almost gave me total heart attack that day, as she held it up for everyone to see, was that the sliver of bone she found in her beef wasn't a sliver of bone at all. It was a tooth from one of the dogs.
Oh, what?
Who had been enjoying her meal before she had.
Oh, dear.
Imagine if she'd found out. My word, it would have been carnage in the kitchen. It's Ginger. So it's a familiar tale. We've had joints being stolen by the dogs before, but they've never left their teeth behind. What do you say?
That was a nasty twist in the end, wasn't
twist.
it?
Nicely done, Ginger.
The mother-in-law sounds pretty horrendous, but actually I blame the husband, because she did call the husband, didn't she, and say, can you come and answer the door, please?
He was busy.
And he was in the garden having a nice drink with with her sister and her boyfriend, and couldn't be bothered to open the door. Yeah. So she had no choice.
As the doorbell went.
Exactly.
Any excuse.
Anyway, the husband should have gone to answer the door, in which case this would not be an issue at all. So I blame him. I don't blame Ginger. And I think, I feel sorry for the butcher, but I don't think it would have had any impact on his business, because it doesn't sound like the mother-in-law went shopping there anyway. So you are forgiven, Ginger.
Mother Superior.
See, would you stop that?
Would you just go to...
Yeah, can you?
Okay,
you
I'll
can
do it.
help?
I'm making the food, and I'll also answer the door. It's
You
fine.
see, I was really sympathetic with Ginger for a very long time, until the dogs got the meat and she just wiped it off and stuck it back in the oven. I think that's unforgivable.
We'd all do the
same.
same.
Well, no, I wouldn't do the same. I'd
you
say
wouldn't
I'm
cook the meat?
I wouldn't. But I wouldn't. I think to actually give somebody food that has been contaminated by a dog eating it is the worst possible. I mean, we've all had our shares of difficult mother-in-laws, and so I can get that. But actually, this could have been very dangerous. She could
Is
have
dog
contracted...
snark dangerous? dangerous then?
Well, yeah, of course it is. Of course it is. If
Right,
it's-
Sal, how many years have you and I been working together and I've
Many.
been feeding you food?
Oh, Nigel. Nigel Slaver.
I feel a confession coming on.
I just think that it's unforgivable to do that. I think you would have been braver and cleverer, would have been gone outside and said, I'm sorry this has happened, but I got this the rest of this food is delicious, so eat this. So you're not forgiven.
Okay, Brother Matt.
Well, stop with the doorbell. I'm going to forgive, and I'm going to tell you for why. Frankly, if she couldn't notice that it was a dog's tooth that she was pulling out of her own mouth, then she deserves everything that's coming to her. I mean, it's not just a little bone. It's pretty easy to spot what a tooth looks like, and also you could have spotted that the dogs had one of their teeth missing. So I'm going to say it's entirely the mother-in-law's fault, and I'd frankly have done the same. I'd have just dusted it off.
Especially when you spent a lot of money.
What the eyes don't see, the chef gets away with, no problems.
Brother Nigel.
Well, it was obviously a well-rested joint. It didn't even go back into the oven, and it was a soil snark and tooth blood gravy.
Yes.
So I've heard of sixpences in Christmas pudding, but never terrier tooth in a roast. But she does sound a horrible mother-in-law. I wasn't sure if she's still around the way it was being told, but anyway, Ginger, you are absolutely forgiven, and it sounds like, and well done to your butcher. It sounds like a fantastic piece of roast.
Have you ever served anything with snark in it? To us?
Sal and I go back a long way, but in the early
Snark
days,
you.
Sal, I was still very experimental.
I've never recovered, Nigel.
It was like the old buoy of of BBC
Thanks.
days.
Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
And that was the confession from the crypt for this week, featuring Rebecca. Almost forgot Rebecca there for a moment. Sally Traffic, and Nige.
And you doing the doorbell thing, which basically meant that we would get loads of
People
complaints every
love
time.
that.
No,
People
they
love
don't.
that.
No, they don't.
If you have a request for a vintage confession, send over as many details as you can remember. confessions@bbc.co.uk. We'll try and dig it out. That's also the email if you have a confession. Sister Bobby, you forgave 3 this week. So your yearly tally, 16.5 to 13.5. So,
It's very generous this week.
Yes, good for you.
Matt, surprisingly,
Yeah?
forgave everybody.
Yes!
Back to normal.
Excellent.
26 forgivenesses and 4 not forgivenesses.
Can I ask, did we
Yes.
forgive Robert?
Yes, I think we did.
We did,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, everyone forgave Robert because you were
He's-
bought by a chocolate.
Well, there's the thing.
Yeah.
Send us more chocolate.
If you made it to the end of the last podcast, I asked you to tweet, not that kind of gel. Thanks to Swanee and Matthew, Sarah, Dom, Anna, Rosie and Grace, ages 10, 8 and 8. This week's code phrase is bottom burps in the mist. Does
That was
work?
you. Yeah.
I think that's fair enough. Remember, please, subscribe to the podcast and then I won't have to nag. And don't forget you can hear the whole unadulterated version of our live radio show every weekday from 5 on Radio 2. Thanks for listening and vote for us.
Yes, please do.
The Confessions Podcast. Go in peace.